What is going on, Canes Sport? Izubee Charles, joined by Stephen Wagner for another Inside Canes Recruiting podcast. Stephen, it was a very, very busy weekend down there in Coral Gables. They had their spring splash pool party, a little tongue twister there. Ton of top guys from the 2026 class, and a few 2027 guys were down there in Coral Gables. And Miami landed a commitment from 2026 offensive lineman Joel Irwin, who recently decommitted from the Louisville Cardinals. So huge win for Miami on the trail right there. He might not be the highest rated guy, but the Hurricanes really, really like Joel Irvin and think he has potential to be a big time tackle at that next level. He's a seventh commitment for the Canes in the 2026 class, joining a growing list of guys. Stephen, Miami Land and Joel Irvin, just what are your quick thoughts about that and the prospect that he is?
Tall, long, athletic, powerful, flexible, twisty offensive lineman who I think is going to be a great tackle at Miami. I don't think enough people realize just how high Joel Irvin was on Miami's board. Hurricanes absolutely loved him. They think he's explosive. They think he has a billion traits that will directly correlate to success. I really do agree, especially looking at how much of a force he is in the run game. I really, really, really like Joel Irvin. I think he could play guard if Miami really wanted him to play guard. But I think he was kind of tailor made to be an offensive tackle. I mean, this kid is just a straight up monster in the run game. It absolutely dominates. I mean, pretty much every defensive lineman and linebacker that he's gone up against. Really fast too. Kind of has speed that, for his 6'6", 280-pound frame, it kind of makes you turn your head and go, wow, holy crap, that kid can freaking move. Now, he's got pretty good foot speed. He is a little bit twitchy, which I think is going to end up helping him in the pass game whenever he starts developing in pass protection. Obviously, obviously a lot of true freshmen kind of struggle in learning pass protection early in their careers, but I do think that that's going to be an area that he will eventually get very, very good at. I like him a heck of a lot. I think he's got a ton of traits that translate really well.
Yeah, Miami beat out some big time schools from Georgia, Florida, Kentucky. The list goes on and on. It's pretty interesting. This weekend was the second weekend, back in Coral Gables. And between those two visits, he actually visited Florida. And, a lot of people up there in Gainesville thought, they did really, well with that, visiting, where they stood with Joel Irvin. But, he said that ultimately at the end of the day, he just saw Miami being a better place for him to develop under Coach Mirabal. And, he said he made that commitment after watching that practice and, was really excited to join, the Hurricanes and potentially learn under Coach Cristobal, Coach Mirabal, and all those guys. So massive, massive, win for the Miami Hurricanes on the trail. And like you mentioned, a lot of people don't really know how much they really prioritize and really like him. And they showed that these last 2 weekends, getting him down with his family, and eventually landing that commitment from Joel Irvin. So make sure to check out that story that we have on him and Steve's analysis of him as well. And we're going to jump to the 2025 class and talk about the top uncommitted guy in that class, and that is four-star cornerback Javari Flowers out of Miami Northwestern. Going to be making his decision later on today. And Steven, this has been a wild recruitment. Obviously, he reclassified him to the 2026 class and the 25 class. Took a handful of official visits, and now it is decision day for the four-star prospect. Earlier we really thought this was all Miami, but just what are your thoughts about Javari Flowers and his commitment later today?
Yeah, man, this has kind of been, a little bit of a wild ride because he was initially a member of the 2026 class and viewed as, a really, really talented kid Miami would have loved to have in 2026. But he's coming in, but he suddenly decided to reclassify to 2025. Ended up taking official visits to 6 schools: North Carolina, Notre Dame, Auburn, Florida, Miami, and Georgia. Those ended up basically being the 6 finalists and the 6 schools that we were really most focused on. But right now, it looks like this is going to kind of be a battle between Notre Dame and Florida. That's just based on what I've heard on my end, and I've talked to some other reporters in the On3 network. They kind of agree that they think it's a battle between Miami and Florida. I think that kind of process of elimination, we can sort of say that, historically speaking, Miami Northwestern doesn't exactly have, rich ties to Notre Dame. That hasn't been one of the schools that Notre Dame has been known to kind of dominate in their recruiting pipeline. You don't see a ton of true South Florida kids end up deciding to go spend their winters in South Bend, Indiana. I think that in that regard, if you kind of follow that process of elimination, I think that Florida probably would make the most sense. But honestly, right now, I don't think a decision has been made. I have not heard that a decision has been made. So who knows where he could end up? I think it's more likely than not he ends up at either Notre Dame or Florida. There's still a possibility that he could end up at Miami. Miami still wants him. You don't want to let that kind of speed leave your backyard if it's at all possible. But kind of the timing of this thing, I think, has complicated things quite a bit. Because if he was a member of the 2026 class, then I think it's much easier to go ahead and take him and admit him. But him being a 2025 need, or being a 2025 recruit now, and on such short notice after they've already signed the rest of their class, and him having to go ahead and make that announcement and that decision by March 31st, because April 1st is the cutoff to be a member of the 2025 recruiting class. And Miami still has portal needs that they need to address in the spring window. I think that it really is just kind of an issue of bad timing. I think if he was a member of 2026, I would feel much better about his chances to end up at Miami. Right now, my RPM is still on the Hurricanes. I am planning on moving off of that at some point. I think I would be surprised if he ends up picking Miami. Although I will say, even though I would be surprised if he picks Miami, I also think there's a non-zero chance. I think the odds are better than zero. Miami isn't totally out of it. There is a universe that exists where I think he ends up picking the Hurricanes, but I think right now I would be kind of surprised.
Yeah, really interesting development how this kind of whole recruitment played out, like you mentioned, and obviously with him making that jump to the 2025 class, kind of not messes up but shifts things around on Miami's board because they already signed members of that class, and like you mentioned, I feel like having those spring portal needs is something that you have to talk about in this one as well. So obviously, like you said, never want to see a South Florida kid leave the backyard and go somewhere else. But hey, we'll see how this one ends out. Obviously, like Steven said, not a 0% chance Miami gets a but. It looks like things are kind of leading towards the Gators, and Notre Dame's also in the mixture as well. So make sure to stay tuned with Kingsport. We'll have you covered with all that. But we're going to jump back into this weekend because there was a ton of talented guys in Coral Gables. Obviously, like we talked about, Irwin committed, but another talented 2025 prospect is the number one interior offensive lineman Lamar Brown out of Louisiana, who is in Miami, but the Hurricanes are recruiting him as a defensive lineman, and he had the chance to speak with Coach Damian Lewis, Coach Jason Taylor, and said a lot of good things about his first visit to Miami. So make sure to check out that story that we have on him. Obviously, I think pulling him out of Louisiana is going to be a very, very tough task, but he seemed very impressed with what he saw from the Hurricanes this weekend. Brought his whole family down. Is going to make his way back for an official visit as well later this summer. So Kane just slowly chipping away. He has a top four of LSU, Florida State, Texas A&M, and Miami. So a guy that the Hurricanes really, really prioritize in that 2026 class in the trenches. And we've talked about it. This year's not, as star-studded up front in that front seven, but Lamar Brown is one of the top prospects. And Steve, I want to ask you about, another guy on the opposite side of the ball, Kenai Pepe. Really said Miami's, one of, if not his top schools, and he's a guy that they're really prioritizing. So what's the latest on Kenai, after this weekend visit?
I love the position that Miami is in for him right now. I think that they're probably at or near the top of his board. Hurricanes have been all over him, I mean, for freaking years. And this is a kid whose comp, keep in mind, is probably Francis Mauigoa. That's how highly he's viewed in Coral Gables. There's a strong argument that he was the best player Miami hosted on campus this past weekend. Hurricanes absolutely freaking love him. He's probably the biggest priority for Miami in this year's class outside of Jackson Cantwell, number one overall prospect in the country. Miami really, really wants him. Miami is right there in that top group of schools, possibly at that top group of schools for him. Hurricanes are doing a freaking fantastic job right now. I definitely have to consider the Hurricanes way, way up there for him.
Yeah, another guy that, like you said, Miami's prioritizing the offense line, and we've talked about this, at length throughout this cycle. And we think that offense line is going to be, that position group for the 2026 class because they do lose, a ton of production after this year in that group. But a lot of big time names in the mix for the Hurricanes on both sides of the trenches with, the offense line and defense line. And one guy I also want to talk about is Bodney Cleveland out of Alabama, Parker High School, where former Miami commit Timothy Merritt went before he flipped to Tennessee. If you guys remember that funny whatever happened on signing day. But another guy out of Alabama, Miami's prioritizing. He talks about how his relationship with Damian Lewis coming from Colorado to Miami has played a big role in his interest in the Canes, and he's another guy that's going to be down there for an OB later this summer. And then they just have a ton of stories on guys like Derek Cooper, who he said this was his 9th time visiting Miami. More than any other school, and the Canes are making him feel at home. He was, having a fun time riding around on the scooters with Miami commit Jordan Campbell, who's also pushing for him, and he's another guy that they'll have an update on. Recently visited Auburn. He's saying all the right things. I think he ultimately ends up in Miami, but this is going to be a recruitment that has, a few twists and turns in my opinion. But I think he ends up staying home. He wants to, play in Miami, just kind of go through the process like everyone else would, and just hearing out other schools. But I think he'll ultimately end up in Miami. He had some interesting things to say about Corey Heatherman and their relationship. Really, really likes Corey Heatherman. He didn't want to, bash the old staff, but said he didn't really, connect with, the old defensive staff like he does with these guys. So great to hear that, one of your top commits is loving the hire, building that relationship. And, before we close out the show, Stephen, just want to get your thoughts on, a guy that you spoke with, Hezzy Kent, who is, Miami's, top tight end target this cycle, a big time prospect that, got back on campus. It's really hard to get a hold of Hezzy Kent. So when you do talk to him, got to get a lot of information. Just, what are your thoughts about Hezzy Kent and where things stand after that conversation?
Yeah, I had the chance to. Like you said, had the chance to talk to Hezzy. I kind of pushed him a little bit, I shouldn't say push, but I did press him a little bit, trying to find out, just where exactly does Miami stand. I definitely think the Hurricanes are on the higher end for him. He's got 5 or 6 schools that are really way up there for him right now. Florida, Florida State, Texas. Those are a couple of the schools. Georgia Tech's up there too. Miami as well. I do think that Miami and Florida are both really right there for him. He and his family do like Miami. I think Cody Woodall has done a really good job. I think they like Mario Cristobal. I think that they like kind of the vision that Miami has for him. But I mean, quite frankly, and keep in mind, this is basically, a Darnell Washington type kid. But, also you kind of have to keep in mind that he does have some strong connections to some of these other schools too. And, some programs obviously have a lot of resources that they can throw at him. Georgia Tech is the closest of the major schools that are recruiting him, if he wants to stay in the state of Georgia. His high school head coach was in the wedding of Florida's tight ends coach, Russ Callaway. So there's a very, very tight connection there. Texas obviously has basically unlimited NIL that they are just, kind of throwing at these kids, and they're really working their way into the mix as well. So, of those schools, I definitely do believe Miami is on the higher end, but where they sit specifically, I think is kind of the question that we're still waiting to hear the answer to.
Yeah, it was. I think it was absolutely huge for Miami to get him back on campus this spring. And like I said, he's another guy going to be returning to Coral Gables for an official visit. And as that recruitment thickens, we'll have you guys covered with all that we have. And like you see on the ticker that's been scrolling at the bottom of the screen throughout the show, your subscriptions are vital. So if you're not already subscribed to canesport.com, make sure to test it out for a 1-week trial for $1. Yes, 100 pennies, $1 to check out all that we do at Cane Sport, whether that be recruiting scoops, team coverage, or just all things Miami Hurricanes. And if you did like this video, make sure to leave a big thumbs up. Join our conversation on the message boards at canesport.com, like I said, where we talk all things recruiting and give you the latest on situations like the Javari Flowers and a big recruiting weekend. So make sure to leave a thumbs up, like I said, on this video if you liked it. For Stephen Wagner, I'm Izubee Charles. Thank you all for watching. Have a great rest of your day.